Marx wrote his book called Living with Fear. It was not the full answer to our anxiety, but it opened a huge door for psychiatrists and psychologists and for the community generally to get a better understanding of how fear works in the human zone. What does fear do to you? On the positive side, I've alluded to a few things already. It alerts us to the need to change direction to avoid danger. It alerts us to the need to decide what is a real fear and what is the distortion, what is the exaggeration, what is the neurotic fear. It alerts us to the need to realise that wrong ways to manage fears can actually increase fears. Well, many people would say it's not the wrong way to have huge stockpiles of nuclear missiles, but they're put there to try and get fear under control, to protect us from the enemy who did or did not exist. But then we had to develop another contraption to intercept the missiles. And so the missiles led to greater fear rather than to reduce the fear. And even today, the nations of the world, with all their nuclear weapons and with the enormous amount of money spent on our protection, how much protection is available to us? Because with all those nuclear missiles, it doesn't stop people coming under the radar, as it were, and doing an enormous damage to us. Fear. It can also engender courageous actions, great sacrifice, and great altruism. That's the positive side. But the negative side concerns us intensely, because fear diminishes us. It diminishes us as people. It diminishes our dignity. It disempowers us. We feel out of control. It distresses us. It devastates the best that's in us. I'm astonished, really astonished. Perhaps we should all be ashamed, in fact, at how widely fear is still in such use in our schools and families, in our workplaces, right up to the leadership of our nations across the world. Fear is the major weapon. In some schools, fear is still used, even in this city, in the same way as it was used in the time of Charles Dickens. We ought to encourage the thought that at this stage of our evolution and our education, we could be looking for ways to teach our children and our adults how we might handle our fears differently, how we might live with fear better. In helping people every day, as I do, to manage their fears, to live with their fears, I regularly stop and ask myself, is this something that works for me? Because it's all very easy for me to stand up here or to be in my consulting room, but does it work for me? Will this help the man or the woman waiting for the results of their medical tests? Will this help the person waiting for the jury to return their verdict? Will this help the person in the pews on Sunday morning? I ask that question. And here I'm going to run two streams of my thinking together, and hopefully it might be relevant for you. I'm going to run the two streams of my life together, in fact, modern psychoanalysis and my understanding of the stories of Jesus. Do note well that in the stories of Jesus, he did not say he would take away people's fears. He knew fear was part of the human zone. It was part of being a human being. He said, control your fear. You must live with fear, but don't let it run away into all kinds of irrational madness. Learn how to control your fear. And that means asking the question, where is this fear coming from? Is it being generated by some doomsday economist who's telling us what he thinks might happen in 2020 or 2050? And will it make any difference to us anyway, whether it's true or false? Is it coming from your doctor as a matter of his philosophy of life, or based on real evidence of the tests? What is our fear about? For decades we've been regularly bombarded with talk about China, but China was usually talked about with a word in front of it, communist China. And that meant it was to be feared. Well, fear it if you like, but in recent times, our economy, this nation, has been greatly saved by China. And so instead of that prejudice and that irrational madness that has been part of us for decades, we might balance it with a more generous acceptance of difference. We've got our faults. They've got their faults. There's difference. And we need to talk to each other. How will we manage our fears in ourselves? Of the stranger, of the refugee, of the homosexual, or the fear of the future? What's going to happen in the future? So I'm going to say a few things, 5 things in fact. 1, put some focus on the enlargement of your spirit, the strength of your spirit. Love does not dissipate all fear, but love, a generous, caring spirit, is better than a frightened, fearful, ugly spirit. Would you agree? So that's what it was talking about. If we unpack what the Bible was talking about, it seemed to give us a blanket statement, but it's talking about a loving, generous, caring spirit is far better than a frightened, fearful, ugly spirit. So how can we get part of that spirit? Focus on the enlargement of your spirit. If you saw the opening of the World Cup in Johannesburg the other night on television, it was a little difficult for me anyway to discern all that was going on there. But one thing stood out. Here was a hugely traumatized nation with a history of violence and fear still rampant. But here was a nation bathed in all the vibrant colour of celebration. Did you see the colour? The colour was hypnotic. It